other commissioners were going to come, but
There's a middle school
Open house.
open house.
There
this
is.
week?
Date, yeah.
yeah.
I had that for 6 years, and I don't have it this year.
Well, I have a middle schooler, but I thought my husband was going and he can't go. And, and
Oh,
the
no.
sixth grader was like, he didn't seem very upset
Of
about
course
it.
not,
So.
yeah. The sixth grader's not going to complain.
I think he was happy to stay and play Xbox. So.
Not too bad. It's a fun event, especially for sixth grade.
Well, you know, I've been to for the Writer Coach Connection. I've been to the open house, so
Oh, cool.
it is a nice to get a band.
Yeah,
going,
yeah, it's a good scene.
Present. Okay, why don't we go ahead and,
You gonna let him sit down?
I got the nod from Jeff.
Move the chair while you're at it.
We can go ahead, if you're, Justin just forgot something, but we can go ahead and get rolling if you want.
Okay. Ready? All right, welcome. Okay, let's call the meeting to order. Start with a roll call.
Commissioner Jordan. Commissioner McCroskey. Here. Commissioner Paulson.
Here.
And Chair Del Rosario.
Present. Item 2, public comment. This is for any items that are not on the agenda. So if any members want to come up and speak on an item not on the agenda, now is the time. Okay, seeing none. Item 3-1, under presentations, monthly police data and on collisions and citations.
Thank you, Chair. There was one pedestrian collision in the month of March, one bicycle collision. There were 15 vehicle collisions, 4 of which were injury collisions. And there were 5 hit-and-run collisions, in which police reported that several arrests were made during the month of March. Citations, for moving citations, included 30 in the month, and 5 DUI arrests were made. There was one other item we were going to report out on. There was a fatality. The pedestrian collision that was mentioned occurred on March 18th around 1 p.m. It occurred at a 4-way stop during daylight hours in the afternoon. An East Bay paratransit vehicle turning left from westbound Solano onto southbound Jackson struck a pedestrian crossing the street. Drugs and alcohol don't appear to be a factor. There were no street or environmental conditions that were factors either. The primary cause was determined to be operator error during a turning movement. So that's the report from PD on that.
Okay. Is this the item with that? There's another sheet on the safety rules and.
Yeah, so in part of the response from PD with the fatality was issuing this information on that and tips for drivers and pedestrians for safety. So that I figured we would share as well here.
Next, do we have any questions or comments from the commissioners? I did have 2 questions. Given that we have such small sample sizes or actual incidents, I'm wondering if there's a way, and it doesn't have to be on a monthly basis, but maybe on a more periodic basis, that we can do comparisons maybe with the county or somewhere that we can make some sort of relative sense to how we're trending. So I don't know if that's something possible for our staff has considered. We may have asked it in the past. I can't quite remember.
I know there's some data sources, various data sources, both state and federal, that can drill into at least countywide data, but they're usually a few years behind.
Yeah. So that's a problem.
That's the challenge there. Generally speaking, it seems like I've seen reports that the trends are increasing in pedestrian collisions that mirror what we see here, and bicycle collisions are relatively steady, but that's just kind of generalizing from
Yeah.
various reports from various agencies.
Yeah. I mean, maybe even if it's old data, maybe there's a possibility to do it on an annual basis or something like that, just so we can see how we're trending against the rest of the county at least. My second question was the safety information. How is this going to get disseminated to the public?
The PD issued this through their channels, but I don't know if there's broader dissemination plan for this.
Okay. Yeah, please.
Is there any reason to believe that this is not an isolated incident for paratransit buses? Is there any information about paratransit and their safety in general?
I don't know.
Yeah, I know a little bit about paratransit, but they do go through regular driver safety training. I'm not sure what the period is of that, but it is a requirement.
Do you know if there's data out there that one could access? And
Yeah, there is actually. So we can look at, we can probably request to look at collisions and incidents over whatever period of time.
so I could go poke around on their website and see if any of that's public, or?
The website's not very good. I think you can put in a request to East Bay Paratransit, and the data is pretty readily available, and it can be provided to you.
Okay, thanks.
And I had a question. Is it possible, potentially like once or twice a year, to get the pedestrian collisions and the bike collisions on a map so we can see, not every time, not every meeting, but maybe once a year or twice a year, to see if it's, or is it happening near schools, or are they all happening in one area of the city? I think it would be helpful to see that on a map.
The data that's easily mapped is similar to the data that Jeff was mentioning that's older. So we get some initial data from the PD from the previous month, but
They don't give you like intersection
centralized
or
mapped
anything like
data
that?
across. We can request that from them on a case by case,
Okay.
but the easily accessible map data is a little bit lagged, but we can provide.
Okay. I'm hesitant, I don't want to ask. I know you are all so busy, and I hate to even like ask that, because I know it's just one more thing to do, but I think it would be helpful for everybody to see once a year or twice a year where the collisions are occurring in the city.
Maybe given the time delay, maybe the place to address that, at least initially, might be as part of the revision to the ATP. We do go through a lot of mapping, and there's a consultant involved, so we wouldn't necessarily been burdening staff. We might just be folding into that process.
Yeah.
So there's something called TIMS, which is an acronym. I don't remember what it's an acronym for, but it's set up by SafeTrek, which is an institute at Berkeley. And it's a mapping interface to the state accident data, and it's available online to whoever. So I'd be happy to prepare a map so staff didn't have that burden, but it's something that anybody can go in and explore, and has a lot of data. You can click on any accident, and it'll bring up a report and kind of what happened, and so it's a pretty good tool. I recommend it.
How does the data get into that? Is it like from police?
It's from the state, so each policing agency reports to the state,
Okay.
and there's something called SWITRs, which is another acronym that I don't know what it stands for. So TIMS does the mapping of SWITRs,
Okay.
and you get the idea. But yeah, it's state data that's reported up from local jurisdictions.
Hence the couple-year delay in it getting on the map, but it is make it easily mappable.
Okay.
Okay. Any other questions or comments? All right, item 3-2 is shared mobility data.
So I did get a little bit of updated information since posting the packet. Lime has stopped operating manual bikes, so that's why the data was no longer there. They're not putting them out there. We do continue to see one or two scooters cycling through and generating a fair number of trips within Albany, but they're still not being deployed in the city. And GIG did provide their month of March data, which showed another month of robust gains, 18% gains in ridership and trips in Albany.
That's the record so far, record month, it looks like.
Yeah, pretty close.
And significant gains 2 months in a row.
Okay. Any other questions or comments on the shared mobility data? Okay, seeing none. Item 4 is a consent calendar, which is a new agenda item proposed by staff or included in this agenda by staff. So the consent calendar for, I'm sure many members of the commission are familiar with it, but for those in the public, consent calendar items are considered routine and will be enacted by one motion. By approval of the consent calendar, the staff recommendations will be adopted unless otherwise modified by the commission. There will be no separate discussion on these items unless a member of the commission or a member of the audience requests removal of the items from the consent calendar. So with that said, are there any comments or questions on the consent calendar or any requests for discussion of a specific item on the consent calendar?
You pull 4-2,
4-2.
this is the work plan.
Okay. Sounds good. Anything else?
I want to thank staff for implementing this. Even if we pull a couple things, it's still a great way to streamline, especially with things like the minutes. So, thank you. One request would be to change the wording at the head to reflect the commission instead of the council. Minor problem.
On the agenda?
I think it might be corrected on the hard copy we have currently, but on the posted version, yeah.
I'm looking online. And perhaps my online copy was not updated recently.
So, question for staff, do I take a motion for the consent calendar, and then we discuss the item that was pulled?
Sure, either way, if it's a brief discussion on 4-2, then you could have that discussion and do it all at once, or if someone wanted to vote against one of those items.
Okay, we'll take the discussion on 4-2.
Yeah, real brief. So again, back to my pet peeve. If we could change establishing procedures for long-term encroachments into the public right-of-way to encroachments onto city property. Since in Albany, the right-of-way is owned by the city, and people don't seem to understand that.
Can you tell us where you are first?
And the other work plan items.
Other work? Okay, great, thank you.
I'm fine with that. Anyone else have any comments?
I hesitate, but I'd like to propose a new item. And that would be curb management. In other words, addressing how we use our curb space. Perhaps not globally, but certainly in relation to projects that come up. I think of the ride share, the delivery share, places where we have red zones that are used as drop-off zones, like by the pool on Portland. Just an example, even if that gets changed for some other reason. Currently, red zones are used as drop-off zones, and we have the red zones for visibility and for safety. I think we need to consider the changing environment and address it.
I don't know if we second that, but I would second that. I think there's a lot of thought going into curb management these days, and there's also ways that technology can be incorporated into managing curb, geofencing locations by the rideshare companies. But there's even old school stuff that you can do with curb management, just multiple uses of curb depending on time of day. So there's lots of things that we could look at with curb management. So, to staff, how do we incorporate?
Well, so I think with those changes, I'll move the consent calendar,
There you go.
including those changes, 2 changes.
Do we have a second?
Just a quick question. So we talked about public right-of-way and the term public right-of-way.
last time. Are you folks comfortable with this change?
For purposes of your work plan, is great.
Okay. Okay.
We'll continue the discussion later.
Okay, so there's a motion on the table for approving the consent calendar?
Was there specific language on curb management?
I'm open.
Just to point out to you, the fourth bullet point is modifications to curb management adjacent to Albany Unified School District facilities, which is a very specific thing. Do you want us just to say, to eliminate the reference to school district and just keep it more general?
Or we can change adjacent to including?
It's even better.
I would prefer a separate item, since the school thing is very specific and very needed and very soon. And I think what Ken is bringing up has more to do with shared mobility services.
True.
I would like to see them both addressed. I'm not
Yeah.
concerned with how we word it.
So I would just say curb management related to deliveries and shared ride services.
Which also happen at school properties.
Yeah, I think it'd be broader, right? It'd be
But-
passenger drop-offs, and
I'm sorry?
it'd be broader. It would be passenger loading, commercial loading, short-term parking, and rideshare.
So you could string it out. What if we said something like, consider curb management citywide and specifically adjacent to school district facilities? Or does that leave open an interpretation of what curb management is?
Well, I guess I'm confused. I think it'd be better to have some focus to the item, and it seems like the issue is more what's new, which is the ride sharing and the massive increase in delivery in personal vehicles. I mean, in terms of business loading and school loading and things like that, certainly that could be improved, but that's something that's been ongoing. I don't know that I really want to sign up for reviewing curb management around all schools, other than beyond what is specifically being requested by the school district based on the transitions that are happening there. I'd rather focus on the newer phenomena and getting a handle on that.
Is that your intent, Ken, to look at the rideshare?
To me, it's a bigger picture, and maybe we want to focus it more. I've also seen rideshare stacking up at the middle school at pickup time. So to me, it's all, part of a larger whole. In terms of successfully knocking items off of our list, maybe we better have two separate items so that we can check something and feel successful, or at least take, reasonable bites of things. So in the interest of that, so perhaps an item like consider changes to curb management based on advancing technologies.
Yeah.
All right, let me put that forward.
And then leave the.
And leave the current bullet.
Yeah. So it's an additional bullet. Does the motion still stand as is? I assume it does. Staff, do you have the right language?
Can you read it back?
Consider changes to curbside management based upon advancing technologies. And the second was changing public right-of-way to public property.
Okay, so there's a,
I move that we,
I think there's already a motion on the table. Yes,
Okay.
that's still valid. So,
I'll second.
okay, all those in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Seeing none, the consent calendar passes.
Great.
Okay, item 5-1 is proposed curbside management of Albany High School for Ocean View Elementary student relocation. And my understanding is that this item will be
Yes.
continued unless there's public comment.
So it doesn't look like anyone came to speak on this item. We didn't notice for this item. The school district held a community meeting on Tuesday and would like to consider changes to the proposal. And so they have requested to bring this back to the commission next month. So we kept it on the agenda since we noticed it in case anyone wanted to speak to it, but would suggest continuing it to next month at this.
Unless there are comments from the commission on the item, but yes, please.
So it may have changed, as you said, but I was wondering if this is for Ocean View students, and part of the plan, it seemed like the main part of the plan that was a change was providing drop-off and pickup zones on the north side of Portland, which would be westbound. That's the direction that most people from Ocean View would not be coming.
Right.
And so I was sort of curious to hear from the school district how they were going to educate people to use that, because I'm worried people are going to go up Portland and all be making U-turns, and it's going to turn into just a big disaster there. So they either have to educate people to go up Washington, overshoot, and come back. And I just want to raise that issue and, hear back. It didn't seem like the most natural place. If it was Marin School, it would be one thing. And that might make more sense when that comes along. But for Ocean View, it didn't seem to make as much sense.
And then just one thing, too, that I was curious about, and then I guess we can discuss next month, is in the graphics showing proposed loading and unloading, there was a blue curb on one of the spaces, and I wasn't sure if that would be changing to a loading zone or staying as, there's no, the curb is just blue, there's no signage anywhere associated with it. But there are two other handicap spaces, like one in front of the pool and one further west. If we could just have clarification on what's going on with those, that would be helpful. Because I know I live near the pool and I see a lot of seniors and folks who use the handicap spaces, use the pool during the day. So.
There's no signage.
By the pool?
That's it. I'm sorry?
Oh, no signage by the pool? Is that what he was?
I'm surprised. I thought there
It was just, there was just a blue, it's one of the pull-in spaces, and it's larger, but there's no like paint on the ground or a sign or anything.
Any other questions or comments on this item that will be continued? Okay. Yes, please.
Comments, there are no additional bike parking spaces being added with the additional students. They're moving, there's a notation of moving some bike parking spaces in the plan. A lot of these kids are coming across town.
Yeah.
So that seems inadvisable, insufficient.
I agree with that. Thanks for observing that. Yeah, because I think, I'm not sure, but I think the racks at the high school are pretty much fully subscribed already, so there is not vacancy to be utilized.
Currently, the pool, certainly this winter, the pool racks are being used as overflow for the high school. I haven't surveyed this spring. Certainly with the good weather, I'm expecting that the pool racks are fairly full with high school students because they're reduced racks at the high school.
Okay, any other comments
That's what's been-
on this item?
We just had a mismemory.
All right, so we'll wait for it to come back to the commission at a future date, presumably next month. 5-2 is proposed school loading zone on east side of Masonic, south of Garfield.
So this is a follow-up item from a previous discussion regarding off-site loading zones for the middle school and the new annex building, providing opportunities for parents to pick up and drop off away from Brighton and Masonic congested intersection. The commission previously discussed a loading zone further north on Masonic at the very close to the junction with Brighton, and requested a future item to discuss a loading zone further south of Garfield, so that vehicle dropping off could then avoid the intersection altogether. So this is the location here. The car furthest to the right car is blocking the area that was discussed previously that has pavement that comes right to the curb, and then there's the path is pretty close to the curb going south from there. 100-foot loading zone would go from sort of the back of that blue car, the second car, back to this second tree here would be about a 100-foot zone there. So that is what staff is proposing, and can answer any other questions on that.
Questions from the commission?
So this is an area where the walking path comes fairly close to the street?
Yeah, so there's pavement behind this first vehicle where the path actually connects right to the street, and then south of there it stays close to the street for a long stretch. There's also actually a little bit of seating, I think I included in the picture from the other direction, the staff report, under the BART tracks near there as well.
Has the district had any comments about this additional loading zone, or nothing? They didn't ask for it. It was, okay.
Is the district aware of this change at this point, or?
They were aware that we were discussing loading on Masonic. I don't know that I've talked to them about this second one coming back to the district, but we talked about earlier, once we do have these curbs, providing maps or information to the district to help disseminate to parents.
Any other questions? All right, let's open up for, is there any public comment?
Well, thanks for considering this. It's exactly what I was hoping for. I'm not clear on exactly what the terms of the loading zone will be. Will it be 3 minutes during certain hours, or like what will the sign say exactly?
Staff is proposing that it's the same as the earlier loading zone, which would be 3 minutes during the hours between 7:30 and 9:30 in the morning, and then 1:30 to 4 p.m. in the afternoon.
Comments from the commission? Do we have?
Looks great.
This looks good to me.
So I'll repeat, I think I made this comment last time, in that I understand the desire for it and what you're trying to accomplish, but it's like 900 feet from the school that you can't even see from the drop-off zone. You know, there's currently parking available. If somebody wanted to drop off there, they could. We're also next year going to have 160 first and second graders there, and I have a second grader, and I wouldn't use a drop-off zone here because it's different. You walk the kid to the school because you can't even see the school from the site. So, you know, I understand the desire and what we're trying to do, but it just having a drop-off zone for a location that you can't even see seems odd to me.
Well, I think it makes more sense for middle schoolers. Certainly for first and second graders, doesn't make sense, but I think it's worth a try. And while it could happen now, actually designating a loading zone there and getting the school district to promulgate that information, which would be a critical piece, and then be interesting to see if people start using it, because, I mean, I live a half block from Brighton, and I just completely try to avoid it during those hours altogether. So to give parents who do need to drive and drop off their children the opportunity to have a different way to do it and to go down Garfield.
But is there, there's parking available there in the mornings? Have we, as somebody, I mean, I'm assuming there's parking. Whenever I go by, there is like tons of parking. I'm assuming there's, like, if you wanted to drop off there, you probably could already do that.
Right, so I just see it as an education piece. So it creates a space which might get people's attention, and it sparks a conversation with the school district to actually get the school district to promulgate this option. Because in my experience, and it's been a little while now, the school district tends to send out information on drop-off zones and things like that at the beginning of the school year. So this could be included in that. Otherwise, without an official zone there, I think the school district would be more circumspect about suggesting people try this.
Yeah, I think, a lot of people, like when I drop my kid off, he gets dropped off 2 blocks because there's no way I'm going down that street. And if it's raining, then you get wet. And I think, yeah, I just, again, it's 900 feet from the school that you can't even see from the drop-off zone. And that's sort of I understand what we're trying to do, but I just, there's a drop-off zone and people we're going to say, what are we dropping off for,
Good. They'll ask the question. That's great. I agree with Preston's sort of optics response. And also, there's parking there now. In the past, the street has been completely taken over one-sided for construction.
Mm-hmm.
So it protects that area.
Yeah.
It's also not terribly expensive.
I know, my thoughts are, we're just going to have a big change next year, and, I mean, I think it would make more sense maybe to wait until we have, it's just that whole area is just going to operate a little differently with, those students, and it might make more sense to wait until the fall and see how it operates before we block off, because if I live near Ocean View and had a first and second grader, I would probably want to park in that space as opposed to using it as a loading zone and walk my child to
There
school.
should be space for that, too.
Yeah. Okay.
I understand where you're coming from. From my experience doing Safe Routes to Schools for many years, if you don't have something at the beginning of the school year, it doesn't get ingrained in people's habits. So then you're looking at, maybe it's another year before you change patterns.
Oh, go ahead.
I appreciate your last comment. I think I understand the source of the concern, maybe, but let me paraphrase. So the concern is that by removing parking in this area, it's going to reduce the opportunities for people with first and second graders to park and then walk their
I
children.
mean, I have a lot of concerns. The first one is, again, we're like 900 feet from a parking zone, 900 feet that you can't see from the parking zone. Second is, we're having changes in the area, and people get upset, or neighbors, it's my understanding, neighbors are concerned about people parking in front of their house. And this is a big stretch where people can park, and it's not in front of the house. So that's sort of my thinking. And with, again, how middle school operates differently from elementary school. Again, if I were dropping off my middle schooler, I'm parking for 30 seconds while I get out of the car. With my second grader, I'm parking, I'm leaving the car. Although at Marin, people park in the loading zone, leave their cars and walk into the school and are there for 10 minutes. So, that's just my concern. It's my various concerns about this.
So I think in the packet there was a map of the extent of this zone relative to the whole block, but maybe I'm not recollecting. Because I know when I originally saw the item, I was thinking, oh, that the whole block, and then I realized no, it's 100 feet out of a 600 or 700 foot long block, which basically hardly anybody parks in anyway. Currently, they may start parking there, and I think that's a point well taken. But I think as Commissioner McCroskey said, because this is relatively short relative to the whole block, there's still a massive amount of parking capacity that's underutilized. So
There's a motorhome in the upper right corner.
I don't think that was there today when I walked by.
Oh, yeah, look at that. Do you have another?
yes, I mean, you can see in that obviously this is anecdotal, but you can see in that view, I mean, there's just a ton of parking available. So unless the demand for longer-term parking really explodes, it seems like it's going to be able to accommodate both, but we don't know.
Come on up, Harry. You should fill out a card afterwards, so we just have your record later.
Yeah, I understand the point that you need a place to park when you're walking your elementary school kid to the temporary campus. And I think there are plenty of places to do that on San Gabriel, on the south part of the long block of San Gabriel. I think there's a lot of unused parking if you're willing to walk that far, which is essentially the same distance, and probably less convoluted if where you're trying to get to is the annex. So I think there is still plenty of opportunity for people who want to park for more than 3 minutes and walk their elementary school kids to the annex. Just not in this particular spot, but I don't think this was really the best spot to do that anyway, because I think San Gabriel, just north of Portland, has plenty of space and is probably the best spot for what you're looking for.
I think looking at that view as well, the first spaces that would probably fill up for people taking walking first and second graders is the south of this loading zone, because people would tend to park next to what's, I guess, colloquially called San Gabriel Park, so they could walk across it, whereas this loading zone is across from where there's houses, so people would have to either backtrack or go to Brighton. So in that sense, I think it turns out to be fairly well situated, not to conflict unless there's a huge increase in parking demand.
My perspective is that it's a really low-cost thing to do, and we can always change it back. If the parking demand outweighs the demand for passenger loading, there's always a way we can change it back. Any additional discussion on this?
I would just thank our lone member of the public for bringing forward this idea a couple months ago, and staff for jumping on it. I think this is one of the fastest things I've ever seen happen, so.
I think there is a recommendation that staff is looking for, correct? So we should have a motion.
So I move that the loading zone be created as suggested by staff.
Second?
Second.
Okay. All those in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
No.
And the item passes 3-1. Okay, item 5.3, ACTC San Pablo Avenue Corridor Study.
Actually, could I say something more on the last item?
Please.
I mean, it sounds like
Loading up.
Commissioner Paulson will actually be experiencing what's happening out there on a regular basis. So as eyes on the scene and an actual user, I think it'd be great if you're willing to come back and see how it works out. Because you may be right, and we should backtrack. So I think I don't want to discount your experience and perspective.
I don't think we won't be, my second grader won't end up at the annex, but he will likely end up at the high school.
Okay.
We're at Moran.
Okay.
What is the
But
timing?
I will keep my eyes open.
What is the timing of the conversion for the curb?
For the Masonic curbs?
Yeah.
Well, now that we have both of them approved, we had discussed earlier doing it in advance of doing it in the spring and having it in place before the fall. So I don't see a reason why we wouldn't put the work in. So order it over to Public Works for them to install.
Okay.
So if I can jump on that, before the school year starts?
Yeah, I think we can get that done in a reasonable month or two.
Okay.
So several of you attended the community meeting that was held here on April 4th. What I intended to do this evening is just give you a very quick overview, and we welcome any first reactions that you have. We will continue to participate in the planning process for this project over the coming months. To summarize it, this is a Alameda County transportation planning effort for the San Pablo Avenue corridor. I'm going to show a few slides. They had a much longer slide presentation, and that's the full presentation's available on our webpage as part of this agenda packet. But just to refresh everybody's memory, this is a corridor study that runs from Oakland all the way to the just through San Pablo to the end of into Richmond. The commission is looking at 3 different concepts. All 3 of these dramatically change San Pablo Avenue. Concept A is shown on the screen just to summarize it. We'll have bicycle and bus facilities on San Pablo. It would impact street parking and vehicle lanes. Concept B has a bus facility and what's characterized as a managed lane, which is a lane that is used for street parking during most hours, and then is available for vehicle traffic during designated rush hours, a lot like Ashby Avenue is in Berkeley. And under Concept B, the bicycle facility would be on parallel streets, in our case, Canes and Abs primarily. And then Concept C is having the bicycle facility on San Pablo, and instead of a dedicated bus lane, there would be transit islands and jump lanes, 2 jump lanes for buses. The following are the 3 kind of graphics of each of the concepts. This is Concept A again. The bus lane is traveling through in the median of the San Pablo Avenue. This is Concept B. And associated with Concept B, because there's no bike facility in this version, is the parallel bicycle facility options. And just because this can be hard to read on the screen, this is the Albany segment here in this area. So, oh, I'm sorry, you're not seeing that. Yeah, do you mind?
Let the record show that the small hand is moving on the right-hand side of the screen.
So this is Canes Street, Canes Avenue, and then this is Adams here. We will need to work on figuring out the best alignment through the Civic Center area and University Village area. There's a couple different options that we could look at there. And then option C is the bicycle facility on San Pablo. This would impact street parking as well. So we don't need any specific direction from you this evening, but we would welcome any reaction that you would like to share with us. As I mentioned, the planning process is continuing. We participate in the staff level meetings. There are a number of community meetings occurring up and down the corridor. And the final slide, here it is, are a rough outline of the schedule. There is going to be, we believe, some business outreach efforts in particular, including Albany businesses coming up, because that we would expect that they would have a particular interest in the impact on their businesses. And then during the summer, we would expect to see more of a narrowing in on a particular option that would get further detailed study. Be happy to answer any questions or take any comments.
Before I go to questions, I noticed that there are 2 members of the public that came. Did an item that you guys were interested in already pass, or is it a?
No, this is the one I'm interested in.
Great. No, we'll go through questions with the commission, and then we'll have public comment immediately after that. Thanks. Okay, questions from the commission?
Did the option A have bike lanes on San Pablo, or is option C the only option that had bike lanes on?
Option A and C have bike
Okay.
lanes on San Pablo.
And then it looks like no parking on A and C would have no parking on San Pablo then, is that?
Correct.
Okay.
Well, I think A has a bit of parking, not much, but a bit of parking. You can see it on the top side there.
Oh, okay, okay.
And my understanding is with option A, the challenges are at the intersections and what to do with limited geometry. So you're going to have through cars, turning movements, both right and left, the station for the bus, and then the bike lanes. And so there's not space for everything. Any other questions?
Are these presentations is the first time that Alameda CTC is engaged with Albany staff?
No, there's a working group of staff from all the affected cities that have been meeting for, I don't know, 3 or 4 times maybe.
Okay. And were these, well, I mean, I'll get to it, but there was another concept, I guess, that was presented in a peer meeting. Do you have any feel for how many other concepts were considered and dropped?
Yeah, and the numbering and lettering systems changed, and it's hard to put a number on exactly how many derivations of this they've been looking at.
Since I serve on the staff technical advisory committee for Berkeley, I've been participating in those meetings along with Jeff and asked for lots of what-if type of assessments on different things. So the ACTC and their consultant have gone through quite a variety of variations, 2-way cycle tracks, 1-way cycle tracks on opposite sides of the street, things like that. We talked about, could they have cycle tracks running down the middle of the street? Could the bus lanes be curbside? And everything had pros and cons associated with it. Like you put the bus lane curbside and guess where the trucks are going to stop to load. So there's definitely some fairly robust alternatives, consideration, not great depth, but at a pretty high analytical level, just trying to look at different configurations. And the one thing that was very clear throughout was the space is very constrained. We have lots of things we want to put on there, and it just won't all fit. So it becomes a question of what trade-offs are we willing or interested in making.
Thank you.
Additional questions?
So I'm trying to recall, and I can't, is Albany, San Pablo within Albany, is it generally 2 lanes in each direction and then a middle lane for turn? Do we have any medians in Albany? I can't. We do? Okay.
North of Solano, for example, and south of Solano. No,
South of Solano.
South of Solano.
South of
South of Solano,
okay.
I'm sorry.
Okay.
The medians came up at great length during the Complete Streets process.
Okay.
Any other questions? Okay, public comment. You can give it to us afterward. Either way is fine. Thank you.
Melissa Schmidt. I live on Keynes Avenue. I've been here before. Question on the 2 plans where you have a dedicated bus lane. I know in San Francisco, where they have the bus lane, cars also drive when there's no bus going through there. Would this be part of this plan? Cars would go on in this bus lane when buses are not present? That's kind of a question.
They're not supposed to.
Oh, not supposed to, okay. Also, I know it's a challenge when FedEx Amazon are delivering, they will just stop right in the street. This happens on San Pablo, and also I know in prior meetings that you folks have had, business owners who have their businesses along here are concerned about delivering their product to sell. So those are kind of my concerns there.
Thank you. Any other public comment? No? Okay, bring it back to the commission for comments. Okay.
I'd just like to point out that neither of the bike lanes proposed are protective for the whole block. There's mingling at the ends for right-turning other vehicles. And neither of the plans are protected bike lanes, so they're not actually physically separated off from the traffic lanes.
Okay. Any other comments while Preston's loading up some files on the computer? Reed?
So I do want to comment because based on labeling, bus and bike lanes sounds wonderful. But there is that issue of at the intersections, what's happening with the bike lanes and the right turns. And while there may be some variations that could be used, you start to lose efficiency. If it's right turns from the through lane, now if someone wants to turn right and there's a bike or a pedestrian, you're stopping all the traffic behind them. So there were definitely some questions around that. I think given that we have businesses and we have need for loading, there's got to be some parking somewhere, at least for loading activity, especially if there's only one traffic lane left and deliveries stopping in the lane basically means the whole street's jammed up. So that, I think that's really important to recognize. So as much as having both bus and bike lanes sounds great, unless we can address the things that will cause the system to break down, we may not be able to get it. The concept B, bus and managed lane, tries to move in that direction, so I think it's got some promise. The bike lanes on San Pablo, as much as I love bikes, there are parallel routes that we can use for bikes to get high-speed, high-quality, reliable bus service up and down the corridor. You're not going to put the buses on the parallel streets. I feel like we kind of have to pick something that will work really well and be transformative for the corridor from end to end. It's the bus lanes, at least in most places. As you get closer to Oakland, you don't need as much lanes for traffic. Now you can maybe go to bus and bike lanes headed through Emeryville and Oakland, or something like that. So it's not necessarily the same thing end to end, but where we are, especially since we've got a little bit of cycle track on San Pablo by the Sprouts project, the senior housing, we may be able to close a little bit of the gap that was mentioned there, getting around the UC Village area. So I think all of those things are definitely worth considering, and we have to figure out what's going to be politically viable ultimately. I mean, anything we're doing here is cutting down on traffic capacity, just passenger cars, and that will always make me a little bit anxious as to where will those cars go. Eventually, people say, hey, the bus is great, I can get from where I'm going, but getting there may be a little bit of a struggle. And in the short term, we're seeing a lot more diverting traffic coming off the freeway, wanting to drive on San Pablo. When they can't go on San Pablo, they go to the next street they can find. There are more traffic, cutting through UC Village to get to 8th Street on the other side. And I think we have to kind of be cognizant of what are the potential consequences, at least in the short term, of whatever we're proposing. So those are some of the thoughts that I've had.
So I had a question. If you're going to single lanes per mode, then I don't really see how it matters which mode you put on the parking lane or curbside. I mean, if you have trucks stopped to load and it's the lane for private vehicles, it's going to mess things up just as much as if it's the lane for buses. I mean, it depends on which one you're prioritizing, but I don't know what. I mean, it seems like in either case, enforcement is going to be absolutely critical, because if you have a truck double park in the only private motorist lane, it's going to be a disaster, even more so than it would be for the bus, because the bus might not be there at that particular moment, but there's definitely going to be a private vehicle there, and many of them. So I guess I don't understand. Maybe you can
Well, that's just
walk me through the trade-off there.
We need to have dedicated loading zones somewhere on the block. It doesn't have to be the whole block. There was a lot of consideration of, can we put the loading zones on the side streets? And that starts to run into trouble in a lot of places. There may be some areas where you can do that, but it's putting that traffic through the neighborhood, sometimes in very inappropriate, tight spaces where the big trucks aren't going to fit. So we have to accommodate the deliveries, not in the traffic lane, not in the bus lane, not in the bike lane, but in their own dedicated spot. And then enforce the heck out of it so that you don't block the single lane that's available to another mode. I totally agree with you on that.
I agree, enforcement seems to be key in these reconfigurations. And you touched a little bit on my devil's advocate comment, which is San Pablo's a throughway, loading zones on the first block of the side street, and everybody else parks beyond there.
Many other cities do that, right? They put loading zones on cross streets.
That's a huge cultural shift.
Yeah, putting
It's a big
passenger parking on the side streets, I think, is more viable, less impactful, perhaps, than the loading zones, just because the trucks won't do it.
Yeah, I mean, making a U-turn on those streets, not maybe what we want exactly. If staff could go back to the image of the parallel bike routes under concept B, I guess it was, in the Albany portion. So rather than go from Adams to Jackson, there was a plan, I believe as part of the San Pablo Complete Streets plan, to include a cycling lane southbound in front of where we are now, City Hall. It was just that one short little piece. And so that would be my suggestion to optimize, so that the route would be down, along Adams all the way to Buchanan, then along Buchanan, and if possible, upgrade that, very short cycling lane to a protected lane, and then we're going to have a cycle track from there all the way down to Cordonesis Creek. That's less of a diversion. It's closer to San Pablo. It uses the infrastructure we've already got in the planning, plus or minus. So that would be my suggestion, that staff bring that up with Alameda CTC as a more preferable option if this project is to go forward with concept B. So with that, if you could switch to the other machine. So I guess a way that I conceptualize this proposal is, because I think they said something like 31% of the private motorist traffic is not stopping anywhere on San Pablo or in the San Pablo corridor. So that's really what makes it a highway. And I think the implication there is, well, I think it was more than an implication. I think it was overly stated that by doing this, the idea is that many of those motorists will divert to somewhere else. They say I-80. I don't know if we know that's what's going to happen. But conceptually, to me, that suggests what we're doing is talking about converting it from a highway to a main street, in the sense that anybody who's on that street has a destination more or less on that street. So that's kind of the question. Do we want to do that? Do we not want to do that? That's the way I look at the question. In terms of operationally, I just pulled this data today. So this is 2017 counts, and along San Pablo. So this is mileposts across the bottom along the highway, and then average daily traffic. And note this scale doesn't go to zero on the left side. It's going from 18,000 vehicles a day average to 32,000 vehicles a day average. And what these counts are is the account at its green line south of the intersection. So not just southbound, but south and northbound, but south of the intersections. And these are the counts north of the intersections. And these are the intersection names. So you can see the 0 milepost is at I-580 in Oakland, and the end of the highway actually is at I-80 where it crosses in Richmond. So not all of San Pablo from where it starts in Oakland to where it ends wherever in Rodeo is highway. It's just this portion here between the two freeways. Albany did a road diet on Marin about 15 years ago. At that time, Marin was about 21,000 vehicles per day, and that was thought to be kind of right at the limit of what would be feasible for a road diet. The city had 2 different consultants do 2 different separate numerical simulations of existing conditions and post-road diet conditions, and those simulations showed that it would work, and I think experience shows it did work as the simulations predicted, barring what we're going to talk about in the next item with some of the recent changes. And so it's really a question of, by reducing capacity down to that limit, you've got some of these intersections that are over that limit. Interestingly, university is under that limit. Will enough motorists divert, or is it just going to crash the system? And I guess what concerns me is Solano has, of all the intersections, Solano, if you add up the screen both south and north, has, maybe with Carlson, it's tied with Carlson, the most current average daily traffic of any of the intersections that they're monitoring. And so we have potentially more to lose. The amount of motorists that have to divert for it still to work here is higher than it is in the other intersections. So if you take that 21,000 number and you've got like 25,000, you've got to divert at least 4,000 motorists, which, as I say, is higher than these other intersections. And I don't know in terms of the business community perspective, because I'm not a business person. I mean, motorists who are driving through and using it as a highway, 9 times out of 10, maybe that other time they're stopping. I don't know. I don't know if you divert all those motorists, what happens to business. So I'm kind of concerned, and we're just going to get Solano intersection sorted out by moving the bus stop, which has been in the works for years and contentious, and that's hopefully going to improve the business climate. So I think it's something that I hope you'll communicate back to Alameda CTC, is that based on this data, Albany is, more at risk of impact than some of the other sections along the highway, current highway. And then there's Carlson, and so the south of Carlson, has the highest count besides Cutting, and a lot of there's a big difference. So north of Carlson, much less traffic, so that's down here, than south of Carlson. So a lot of that's probably El Cerrito Plaza, but a lot of it may be people from our area going up Carlson and turning left and heading to the freeway. So again, that could have a big impact on people in Albany in particular. So I think there's a lot more sensitivity in our area to this design, not necessarily politically, but technically, in terms of making it work. So I don't know what their plan is, but based on the success that I saw with the numerical simulations of road dieting on Marin, I certainly hope they're planning on doing something like that sooner rather than later, so we can figure out what works and what doesn't in different sections. In the public workshop, they also presented a pro-con analysis of the 3 concepts. And so one of the cons of concepts A and B is that the transit stations have to be offset from the major intersections. And this is because they need the left turn lanes at the major intersections, and so they can't have the transit stations there. So it's kind of an odd thing to do. In this other presentation that I had was given access to, they actually presented a retail density map, and the retail is the densest right at the major intersections. So you're talking about putting the transit stations not where the retail is, which is just strikes me as bizarre. And then the other thing that's odd, so I mean, at least they're representing that. But the other thing is odd is if you look at concept C, there's no equivalent upside for concept C. Concept C would keep the transit stops at the major retail areas, at the major intersections, and yet they're not saying that's a benefit of concept C. So to me, that's a little odd that they didn't, you know, give sort of a balanced perspective of the pro and con between those concepts. And then they also talk about in concept B that parallel streets will create low-stress, comfortable biking facilities. However, some of those facilities are up to a 3/4 mile round trip away from San Pablo. And they also mostly already exist. So it's a little odd to me that the project would, one, say, hey, these are great, even though they're so far away, and two, they already exist. So it's not something that the project would be doing for cycling. So I personally view those as actually a downside, not an upside, because they're so far away in some cases from where people actually want to be. And so with those two errors, and there's other ones I perceive in here, I kind of get this feeling that either consciously or unconsciously, there's a bit of bias that's worked its way into this pro-con analysis. And so I would ask staff to kind of push back on that a little bit or be aware of that. I got that sense at the public workshop as well. There's almost seemed like a little heading towards a push-pull. Like, you know, concept B is really obviously what we want, but we're going to present these other straw concepts. In this other presentation I had access to, they did have side running bus lanes as one of the concepts. And so I combined right turn lanes for private motorists with through lanes for buses. It had cycle tracks that were protected all the way through. It was discounted by Alameda CTC due to private motorist intrusion into the bus lanes for making right turns and parallel parking. And, but I wonder if that could be solved with signal phasing. So this is in part based on the idea that from riding San Pablo a lot, between the platoons of private motorists, it's basically empty. I mean, it's amazing, you know, when I'm riding my bike, if I can get into one of those gaps and stay in one of those gaps, I got the whole street to myself, and so that's definitely where I prefer to be, because it feels safer. And so if there was a way with signal phasing to put the buses into those gaps, then they would have a lot more flexibility. For instance, you know, if there was a car parking parallel, they'd be able to shift into the general traffic lane and just go around it. So this is what the concept minus the signals that was shown. So this is side running, dedicated bus lanes with various signals there. So you could actually, with vehicle to vehicle communication, vehicle to signal communication, you could have a phase that's right turn, you know, a green right turn phase for going off of San Pablo, which would be a left turn for the cross street that could activate as the bus is approaching, and that would basically clear out any motorists that are in the way. Next phase would be for the bus to go through. That could be incredibly short because the bus is only going to take 5 seconds to cross that intersection. Bus stops, you have the cross traffic go. Bus takes off because it's only taking 15 to 20 seconds to load and unload because that's part of bus rapid transit. And so then you have the through traffic going through, but the bus is ahead of the through traffic. So it's basically got the whole street to itself at that point. And then you could have the left turning traffic off San Pablo. So that's just one idea, just one concept. But the idea that you can't get those motorists out of the right lane, out of the way of the bus, doesn't really make sense to me if you're sort of designing in time as well as space. So this is, I'm not going to read through this by any means. I'll just add some highlights, but this is my attempt to do kind of a more objective pro-con analysis. So obviously concepts A and B, you have the fastest and most reliable transit. D, I would say you have intermediate. C, you've got the worst. So D being the side-running buses. For sidewalk users, actually, D is probably the safest because you have fewer traffic lanes to cross, whereas A and B would be intermediate. Stop locations, I mean, C and D have the huge advantage that the stops are actually where people want to be, which is at the major retail nodes. And I think that the business community would be pretty keen on not having those stops away from the retail, although I know that businesses tend to underrate spending by transit patrons, unfortunately. Parking in concept B, half the parking is removed during the, I think during the evening commute. I don't know how long that is. Do you know, is that like 3 to 7 or 5 to 6 or?
I think 3 to 7 was mentioned, although they're flexible on that.
Yeah, so that's, you know, again, in terms of business, that's potentially pretty massive because it means you're not going to get easy parking of people who are sort of trip linking on the way home. There's a better term for that. I don't remember what it is, but, and with D, if you remove the medians entirely, you might only have to remove a quarter of parking. Now it would be 24 hours a day that would be removed, but you can probably remove less parking. So, you know, lots of pros and cons. D could actually be built like today, not with the bike lanes, but you could basically do it with all the curbs where they are now. You would have to rebuild the signals and bring in the technology of the signalization, but you're talking about just painting out that right lane, make it a bus lane, build your stations, change the signaling, and you're done. At the point that you want to bring in bike lanes, and you'd have to start talking about removing the medians if you want to keep parking. But it has the advantage of being implemented potentially much more cheaply and much more quickly. So to me, sort of B and D was like, those were the ones that seemed to me that should be carried forward for more detailed analysis. You know, the pros and cons were more balanced between those two. There's another wacky concept I found online that's actually has a report out of the Mineta Transportation Institute, which is having a dedicated bus lane that goes down to a single lane at intersections. And again, using vehicle-to-vehicle communication so that the buses always pass each other mid-block where there's 2 lanes. And so that's a way to save space at intersections. So, you know, there's been some research done on it. I don't know if Alameda CTC looked at something like that. I sort of get the sense that they're really not taking into account the level of technology that's going to be available when this thing is rolled out. So they're designing in space in a more traditional sense of like, well, we just need this space to be for this thing 24 hours a day. Whereas with communication technology and intra-vehicle technology, you can design in time as well in a way that lets you utilize the space more effectively. So I think Alameda CTC should be designing in time as well as space, because then you can utilize that space more effectively potentially and save some space. I would like to see them carry forward concept D with this design in time. We're looking at signal phasing, and I would like them to show their work more. So I don't know, you know, if it would be possible for the public to see the 50 concepts with a mishmash of different letters and names to see what has been considered, rather than being presented sort of a fait accompli. Here's 3 concepts, and obviously one of them is the best, which seems you know, a little bit more of a false choice. Thanks.
Okay, other comments?
You know, I got pretty specific about things in my last comments, but just on a more higher, more perspective scale, you know, there's kind of an implicit hope or idea that people will choose different modes of transit, and hopefully speeding up the buses will help enable that. I'm not sure how much this speeds up buses and how much we can expect that to attract people, given no other changes like routes or comfort of buses or whatever. I am certainly disposed to encourage people to take transit, and to encourage other modes of transit. But I think we have to give some thought as to how much we can expect from that and how that would impact the project and its success.
Okay. Comments?
And this is just a general comment. So there would be one concept selected for the entire San Pablo, or it would just be in segments?
They can mix and match.
Okay.
Probably more mixing and matching with A and B. Any other comments?
I just want to say, I agree with Ken that we want the bus operations to really be efficient. Obviously, we see buses at a bus stop waiting for the stream of traffic next to them to get out of the way so they can pull out. So that's completely wasted time. We see buses waiting at red lights. If we have a dedicated bus lane and we're using some intelligent coordination between the vehicles and the signal system, a bus should be able to go from, Richmond to Oakland, only stopping at the bus stops, hitting a green light continuously through as a,
Only stopping at the KALB.
at the called bus stops.
Probably in this situation, you would stop, if it's center run, you'd run it just like light rail.
Okay.
So you just stop at every
Yeah.
station.
But I mean, that's with proof of payment rather than pay as you board, with a lot of things like that. It can be very fast loading and unloading, and you could get the bus moving much quicker and much more reliably than it does today. So you wouldn't have to worry about checking your phone to see when the next bus comes, because you're going to walk out there and within 3 minutes there'll be a bus there. That's the quality of transit we want up and down the corridor. And a dedicated bus lane is the best way to get to that. We've got to do the other things to push the technology of the signals and the buses. I think that designing in time, in addition to space, absolutely makes sense. One of the biggest challenges has been, your bus stops and your left turns are at those, major crossroads, and so pushing them a block away feels awkward. There may be good creative ways to resolve that. I think that should be, explored a little more thoroughly to try to get there if we can, to be able to do both. Dropping the transit to a single lane where it goes through those critical locations, but giving it the absolute priority over all the other modes so that you can make the buses pass at the appropriate time and place is something we should give some serious thought to. So I generally agree that we want to acknowledge that transit should be the top priority through the corridor. On a separate note, I appreciated Preston's numbers on the ADT going up and down the corridor, and especially the north of the intersection, south of the intersection, because it matches up what seems intuitively obvious to me, that as traffic on I-80 approaches the 8580 junction, which is where the congestion really starts to pick up, they're bailing off at Carlson, at Central, coming up, getting onto San Pablo, and I can see those volumes as they're coming along, and then they start to peel off to go to downtown Berkeley, to UC. So they're going up Solano, they're going up Marin, they're going up Gilman, Cedar, Delaware, some of them finally up University. I know that University Avenue between the freeway and San Pablo has lower traffic volumes today than it did 20 years ago, because all the cars that used to use it are bailing off earlier. The freeway is at capacity. 250,000, 270,000 a day is it. We're not going to push any cars back to the freeway. We just need to get them to stay on there as much as possible, not divert through the local road system, but giving them transit options. Maybe where they bail off, they transfer to the bus. That's the behavior we'd like to see. And that's kind of how we're going to solve it, because we need a mode shift. Just diversion of the cars is going to be problematic. So as long as we're prepared to try to tackle the mode shift pieces of this, I think there's some opportunity to really see some changes.
Comments?
Yeah, it's interesting because it brings to mind the park and ride lot that's being built, which has been oriented to San Francisco, but it could actually go the other way.
Absolutely, sure.
Because, yeah, I know people from Marin who work at LBL who get off and go up Marin. Interesting. Oh, on the freeway, do you have any sense if the smart corridor work, with the metering, the on-ramps, has boosted the capacity slightly?
I haven't heard any strong reports on that. I know that the whole system is still kind of being fine-tuned, so I don't know that we're quite there.
Comments? So I just had a few. So the BRT as they're studying it would be different from the service that you're seeing on the corridor today. So BRT, for those of you guys, I'm sure you guys are all familiar, but BRT is essentially light rail with rubber tire, and a concept that was very popular in South America as well as other parts of the world. And it's a way to get a light rail type of service on the cheap. You don't have to put any rails down. The vehicles are significantly more affordable. So by having the stations in the center, then you would have light rail type stations, sense of place, raised curbs, so that you have level boarding on and off, separate designated zones that you could accomplish also curbside, but probably much more challenging to do curbside with trying to get right of way and having sidewalks, raise up to platform levels, doing those types of transitions. Some sidewalks it's fine, some sidewalks it isn't. I don't know if ACTC modeled it, but the conclusion of their consultant for side running was that on many sections of the corridor, the block faces are pretty short, for one, and then two, there's lots of curb cuts, and that just reduced the effectiveness of the transit lane on the right side. So I think that's why they removed that alternative from consideration and went with center running. The service itself, so if you are thinking about it as light rail, the vehicles will be different. We have a BRT that we're constructing right now for AC Transit on International Boulevard. So it does have different vehicles. There's a promise for more service. So it's not only the speed. I think the biggest challenge with transit operations is the reliability. So, seeing buses bunched on San Pablo, seeing buses bunched on many streets, that's what BRT tries to alleviate. So it is a faster bus, but I think from the customer's perspective, you really want a more reliable bus, and that's what BRT brings. The stations at the intersections, at the major intersections, I think that's definitely a point to consider and to look at more. But it is going to be a trade-off of turning movements versus station. And what we've seen for stations on other BRTs throughout the country is that wherever that station is located, it's going to spark development. BRT is seen as a community development or economic development tool as much as it is a transportation tool. So you'll see it on International now where properties are being renovated and changed over in ownership at the station locations because we know that there's going to be good transit there. The service frequencies, I think there will likely be a commitment that the bus would probably come every 5 minutes or better, would be the expectation. I think San Pablo right now, if you combine all of those routes, it gets to somewhere around 7 minutes, every 7 minutes, but that's sporadic every 7 minutes, not a very regular 7 minutes. And then I think there is a good point about looking at other technologies. There are places in the country and the world that do stuff like managed bus lanes, on-demand managed bus lanes, which are really interesting. I don't know if we have the ability to do it with such precision in this country. But also in Eugene, Oregon, for lane transit, they've tried every single type of concept on their single BRT lane. So I think there is this ability or possibility to look at different options for different segments, and they even have a section where I think it's single transit lane, and then the buses take turns going through it using signal technology. I think there's times where the buses end up queuing a little bit and waiting for each other, but it does exist. So yeah, I mean, I think those are things that we can encourage ACTC to look at. But I really wanted to press on that the idea is like a light rail type of service. They even have vehicles that they try to make them not look like buses, covering up the tires and large windows, and you think that there's some kind of extra equipment overhead, but it's just a skirt that's decorative. So they do all sorts of things to make these things look like trains as much as possible, and I think that's the concept that they're trying to push on the street.
So I think with the idea of design and time and trying to time the signal so that the buses are between the platoons actually takes advantage of the fact that they're buses and they're not light rail, because they can change lanes, so they do have more flexibility. So I think it turns that to advantage potentially.
Yeah, I don't know if you can get the reliability of the timing of the bus at every stop to be the same every single day, so it would have to do some, like what if you have a wheelchair boarding, then what are you doing with the traffic behind you, right, for instance?
Also, in terms of Albany, because both Solano and Marin are major intersections, I guess the stops would have to be at Washington and Monroe or something like that. Of course, then you'd be eliminating the left turn into Sprouts, which, so I'm not sure where the stops would be and what that would look like for Albany.
Yeah, the stop spacing would be anywhere from 1/3 of a mile to a half mile, so there probably would not be a stop at both Marin and Solano.
Well, there can't be a stop at either.
Well, in terms of vicinity of those intersections.
Right, but I mean, that's the concept B. There cannot be a stop at either because both have to have left turns.
Yeah. But I don't think we would have two stops within Albany, just generally speaking.
Well, but if the distance is 1/3 of a mile, Albany's more like a mile across.
Yeah,
So there would have to be two stops if it's going to be 1/3 of a mile.
It's 1/3 to a half, so the current stop spacing for the rapid bus is Carlson, Solano, and then Gilman, I believe. So just outside of the Albany borders, and then one right in the center.
Right, but under concept B, I mean, one of the things that was stated is because it's going to combine the 72 and 72R, they would decrease the stop spacing.
1/3 of a mile spacing.
Yeah, which would then put them in Albany, at least two in Albany.
Yeah, it's possible. And I think it's just the trade-offs that you want to make at Solano. Do we want to prohibit left turns and have a station there at Solano?
I don't think I could support, I mean, from a business perspective, I think that would just be total disaster.
Right. I guess, yeah, there's the possibilities of community development or economic development being hurt by not having the stations right at the intersection, the main intersections. But I think the expectation is that the passenger would have to walk, which isn't a bad thing. That's not a bad thing to walk along the commercial corridor.
Right, so we just pick relatively short blocks, when feasible. If they're really long blocks, we could have a mid-block bus stop with a protected crossing.
It's possible. Yeah. So International, they did the same thing. They there's a major intersections of 98th, 82nd, 73rd. The stops are at 72nd, 81st, and 99th, I think.
So Albany might be unique in having these really long, 700-foot long blocks. I don't think International has such extreme spacing like that. So I think it would be having to go to a mid-block configuration with its own signal-controlled crosswalk to get patrons back and forth. So again, something I hope staff will raise with Alameda CTC.
More More comments?
I just want to say enforcement again.
Well, yeah, and on the enforcement, it almost seems like the curb running lanes or that the side running dedicated bus lanes would force that issue more. Because from what I've read, some of the buses themselves have cameras and stuff on them to catch who's blowing it, which private vehicles won't have. So the enforcement seems more easily built into the bus lane than it is to the private motorist lane. I mean, because the buses take a snap of the license plate and bang that person. Now, it doesn't solve the problem right away, but over time, every person who violates that lane when a bus is coming is going to get a ticket, which is not going to happen with the private motorist lane.
It wouldn't be every, but it wouldn't be able to ticket every vehicle that's crossing or entering or exiting the transit lane.
Right, yeah, so that's where the idea of putting the buses in the gaps helps, because then the bus can shift lanes to the general lane and go around that.
So maybe there's an unmanned drone that patrols.
Yeah. That's coming for sure. It's not a joke. But I'm intrigued that you're intrigued by having the single lane at the major intersections possibility.
It's definitely worth exploring, because that's one of the big sticking points.
So I guess that's where my questions come from about what has Alameda CTC explored. I think it would be helpful to the public process if they were more transparent in that regard, so that people who are, insane wonks like myself can actually read that document and see what is it they actually considered and how did they consider it. And, then maybe I wouldn't be up here talking, because I would agree they have good reasons for ruling everything out.
They may. I mean, certainly the time-managed solutions, they have looked at some of those, and the challenges are there's not enough time to process all the modes at a given intersection if we go that way. Split phase is a great way to make it so you don't need a separate turn lane, because everyone can turn from the through lane as long as nobody's using the crosswalk or in the bike lane next to you. And that's the problem. You've got to start separating, and it's a split phase for just the cars or just the buses or just the bikes or just the pedestrians. And time management starts to take up too much time space rather than physical space. So again, I think it's definitely worth exploring to find sort of the little nuanced things, but the big separate everything in time, they've already kind of looked at that and said, well, that's not going to work. But it's not an all or nothing. I think there's a middle ground that probably could give us some improvements.
Well, so that's what I don't have enough information, what they looked at in terms of, did they consider dedicated right turn off San Pablo at the same time as left turn onto San Pablo to clear the lane or not? I mean, they just, in the public-facing information, they just said, well, right-turning motorists are going to block the lane, and parallel parkers are going to block the lane. And so I don't have a sense of the nuance that was brought.
And I doubt they got to that detailed level and type of modeling, I don't think. One thing I should add is that I was going to talk about the next item, but there's dollars from MTC to AC Transit to improve the existing system out there. So there's a rapid system out there that's, 15, 16 years old. And that will look at improving the signalization. AC Transit has done similar projects for College Avenue, Broadway, looking at things like a queue jump lane and seeing, can that bus get in front of the queue of the vehicles, and as you said, get into that gap between cars. So there's potential to explore that in the very short term. That's probably more like a 12 to 24 month project.
Great. I mean, I think if the single center running lane configuration can work at the major intersections, that has less time and complexity that you're naming, in terms of all the different modes having their own, and all the different turning movements, or all the different movements of all the different modes having their own phase. And so that might be actually simpler to pull off.
It may be. I mean, Robert mentioned queue jumps, and usually queue jumps are side-running bus lanes. To do it with a center-running bus lane, you got to get a little creative where you've got a red light half a block back to hold the cars so the bus can get into that lane and get to the stop line ahead of them. But again, that's, we need a little more creativity because we've got this significant sticking point that says either you have left turn lanes or you have a bus stop, but we want both of them at the major junctions. What's another way to achieve that?
So that could be combined, at least for Albany, with the mid-block stations.
Sure.
In the sense that you have that, I guess what I've read online is called a pre-signal.
Yeah.
That's also serving that mid-block crosswalk. Yeah, so I think the message is here, at least from what is public-facing, the information that's available, it seems like Alameda CTC hasn't really, it's not obvious to the public that Alameda CTC has explored all these ideas. And in terms of the queue jump, I mean, I guess what I was referring to was that Mineta Institute report where, having a single dedicated lane, so there would be no queue jump. It's just that you have to time the buses, like you were talking about, I don't know, in a city in Oregon, Eugene, and you'd only have to do it at the major intersections. So, there'd be considerable distance where you wouldn't necessarily have to time the buses, but as they approach the major intersections, then they'd have to time just for where the left turns are. Dedicated left turn lanes are, so that might have more legs than the side running in terms of technical complexity and feasibility.
Any other comments?
Next.
Okay, a nice robust discussion. And that was only for discussion only, so that's exactly what we did. All right, item.
It doesn't mean discuss only this item.
Item 5.4 is an update on Buchanan Marin Bikeway Phase 4.
Right, I'll start with this. We wanted to give you an update on our thinking about the next phase of the Marin Buchanan project. To give you a little bit of context, this is a project that the planning started many years ago. We've implemented now what we call 3 phases, but essentially done in 2 phases. Most recently, and just now being completed, is Phase 2, which are the improvements from San Pablo east to Cornell with the new bike lane and the utility undergrounding. With respect to 5.4, the plan that we had was originally going to be part of Phase 3, but due to the cost of the project, we had to take it out. And what's left to do was an eastbound turn lane. This is traffic coming on Marin from the freeway or from the west side of town. They were coming towards San Pablo, and the design had a extension of the eastbound right turn lane turning onto San Pablo Avenue. And it also shifted that lane in order to accommodate a new bicycle lane for the bicyclist who's traveling through the intersection, staying on Marin. The original need for the extension of the right turn pocket was the traffic modeling that was done some number of years ago. And at this point, at least, we haven't observed a significant problem with that, with traffic queuing up trying to make that right turn. The other part of the project was a bicycle box for the westbound bicyclist who's coming down Marin towards San Pablo, who wants to turn left to get onto San Pablo. And the idea is to create a safe and comfortable way for them to shift into the left-hand lane and make that left turn lane without having to mix it up with the vehicles that are going through straight towards the freeway. In order to do all that, there would be a fair amount of curb work in order to accommodate the turn pocket. We'd also require to acquire some property. I'll say property, not right of way. From the University of California, and we'd also have to, there'd be some traffic signals and detection systems and striping and so forth that would go associated with all that. Before diving right into that project, what we'd like to do is do a post-project analysis of the project that's being wrapped up right now, to see how it's working. The one thing that we have observed is vehicle queuing for the westbound traffic on Marin, it's queuing sometimes even back all the way to Masonic at different times of day. And we'd like to better understand what's going on with that. And then just to have someone take a fresh look at the design. When this design was originally developed, that was quite a few years ago, and I think our sense is that Caltrans is taking a much more innovative look at bicycle facilities than they did back then, and the combination of monitoring and more contemporary bicycle facility design might give us an opportunity to do something a little bit better. It does slow down the process a little bit, but we think getting it right is more important. We have Pre-C Transportation Associates on contract, and we'd probably like to retain them sometime this spring to start that analysis. Be happy to answer any questions, or if Mark or Justin want to add something as well.
Questions?
No question.
No.
One of the items on our work plan is following up on traffic diverting through UC property in light of, I'm pretty sure, in light of the UC development. Is it possible that, so it is possible that people, instead of going to San Pablo at the Marin Extension, are going on Jackson and Monroe? Will we have information about how traffic has changed in that area before this new time schedule in this project?
So you're speaking of the westbound motorist that's coming into town?
I think it's eastbound, actually.
East and southbound.
Eastbound motorist coming into town that's not way, okay. We weren't thinking about that. We were a little bit more focused operationally on this particular intersection. We are doing some post-project analysis of, and want to bring to you soon, the Dartmouth and Monroe and Hawk Signal operations. But we weren't planning in the near term to do that Jackson, Buchanan diversion.
So we just don't know if people have chosen to divert.
Right now, we don't know.
Okay.
I was curious, if there have been any counts of the number of people who are biking eastbound actually on the road at the intersection? Because I think that would be instructive in terms of the cycling lane, because the cycling lane really isn't going to make a difference in terms of whether people ride the road or not there, because what happens upstream is what happens upstream.
We should collect some data on that. I walk through that intersection 2 or 3 times a day. I don't see a lot of bicyclists using it. See the cycle track being used much more heavily.
Yeah, I mean, my guess is not at all, almost, because going around that turn with the trees,
Do you use it? I
blocking
don't.
visibility. I don't. I mean,
I did it once. I'll never do it again.
yeah, it feels really. I mean, it feels, and I mean, I'm in that 3%.
Exactly.
I ride San Pablo at night. I mean, I ride pretty much anywhere, but that's like around that blind turn to be in the road at that speed, no way.
And the path is fine.
And the path is fine, yeah.
And the other consideration with all this is just allocating our resources to what's most important. And I think you've all said this for months. It's getting the cycle track linked up from the grocery store to the intersection is by far a more valuable investment of time and money, it seems.
Yeah, I wouldn't.
And right away with the university, which is never going to be an easy discussion.
To that, I don't think it's worth it to go through all that, to put a bike lane on the street that none of us would use, and I think would see very low use. So the value in that is not enough to justify doing it.
I would say that connecting across and enabling crossing of San Pablo is as important to me as completing the cycle track. So I would separate that.
Yeah, so what's missing, if we can move into comment phase, unless public comment
We got
first.
public comment.
Right, I shifted.
Come on up. Okay, we're good?
Well, thanks for putting this on the agenda. I'm glad to hear progress is being made, and I agree with a lot of what you've all said. High priority on the connecting the cycle track, high priority on the crossing improvements for people who are already on the existing bike path along the Marin extension, being able to continue across San Pablo would be helpful. It's probably true that no dedicated bike lane is needed on the street in that area. I think maybe the markings could be improved. Right now, it shows that the Sharrow goes into the right turn lane and suggests that right-turning cars and straight-ahead bikes will share that lane. And I think there's just a slightly better way to indicate that, which I've seen in some other places where there's what looks like a bike lane, but it's actually the leftmost part of the driving lane, and it's marked with a dotted line. So it looks like there's a bike lane between the straight-through driving lane and the right-turn driving lane, but it doesn't take up any extra width because it's embedded in the width that's allocated to the right-turn driving lane, and most cars won't need to enter that part. So I hope that that could be done just with paint and be an easy improvement. As far as the queuing, I am curious to see what the consultants will report, but my lay experience of it is that design was intended to work so that people driving westward would pull forward as far as possible during the red light and fill up the last block of Marin with cars in both lanes to full capacity. And if all of those cars are able to start moving when the light turns green and move on through, that's a big chunk of cars that gets through quickly. And then after that, the people from the single lane part go through, but it's a lower vehicles per second, per minute traveling through at that point, because it's one lane feeding it, and it's not very efficient. So I think if people would actually pull forward and fill up that last block, I think probably the modeling showed that it would work, and I expect that it would work. I don't understand why drivers aren't pulling forward. I think there are a lot of drivers who just see that the red light is ahead and they think, oh, well, there's nowhere for me to go, so they just stop. And some of them stop in the bike lane, some of them stop half in the bike lane, but a lot of them just stop too far back, or even if they are in that block, they aren't pulling forward to close the gap with the car in front of them, or there's space in the other lane, but they don't want to be in the other lane for whatever reason, so they just stay in so there's plenty of opportunity I don't know how you change driver behavior, but if people can be coaxed into pulling forward and filling that spot, that zone, so that then they can move through efficiently when the light turns green, that's my impression of what would solve the queuing problem.
Thank you. Okay, moving on to comments.
I think I already made mine.
Yes, I think what Harry's saying, the first place I encountered it was on one of the streets by Whole Foods in Oakland. And so it was a combined right turn lane through bike lane, sort of a shared lane, but the bike lane was green backed on the left side of the right turn lane. The most recent place I've seen that installed is on Hearst eastbound at Oxford. Mm-hmm. So that's a local example, and I would encourage the city to incorporate that into the Phase 4 project. I think before I was sitting here and I was sitting out there when the design of Phase 3 came forward, I questioned whether the bulb outs at Keynes westbound were going to cause the problem that they're causing. And the consultant said, oh no, it's fine. There was no simulation done as part of Phase 4, to my knowledge. Staff can correct me if I'm wrong. So I'm not surprised that it's not working out. It seemed like a bulb out too far, or two bulb outs too far to me. And what I observe, again, completely anecdotally, is that it's really less than a block that's 2 lanes. That clears out like super quick, and then the gaps between the cars behind trying to squeeze through that bottleneck are just really long. So I don't know if there's really anything that can be done other than taking out those 2 bulb outs and extending those 2 lanes back further. And I mean, part of the reason I questioned the design was because the simulations that were done for the original road diet said, you know, there needs to be 2 lanes on the downstream side. On the eastbound side, extending all the way to between Standage and Cornell, because otherwise what's going to happen before San Pablo, is that motorists are all going to get in the left lane and you're going to not utilize the capacity. And so it was based on that. I mean, it's not exactly the same, but it's kind of based on that knowledge, which was from numerical simulation, that I was like, is this really going to work to have less than a block of 2 lanes? So, you know, that might unfortunately be what Phase 4 has to include. I don't know if there's another trickier solution, but, and I think in terms of making it so that cyclists who are westbound can get to the path, rather than putting a bike box on Marin westbound so that people move all the way over to the left turn lane, which is pretty uncomfortable for most people. Having I guess what they call a 2-step turns, where you've got a bike box on southbound San Pablo somewhere, makes a lot more sense for the population that we're hoping to facilitate making that move. In that regard, the northwest corner I find pretty uncomfortable. So if I'm riding through westbound across San Pablo, while there's a regulation with cycling lane, it just feels like you're in the target of motorists there because of the way the turn is, and somehow it seems like the curb is pushed out just a little bit. So somebody who's riding, I don't know what your experience is, you know, I kind of have to head towards where the motorists are, and the more motorists are heading towards where I am, and there's kind of always this question, what's going to happen? Are they really going to pay attention to the bike lane stripe there or not? And so if that corner could get pulled back, which would be a huge mess, I know, because the controller's there, the signal's there, you know, it's a giant mess on that corner. It's kind of one of the worst corners in Albany, I think, in terms of just its configuration, all the stuff there. I would say putting money into fixing that, as well as the bulb outs, would be the thing to do, because if that corner could get pulled back just a little bit, that could open up a bike box there. It could make the through cycling lane feel more comfortable to everybody who's using the street. The other thing is the drainage inlet. Obviously, you all know about that. In the short term, it seems like that drainage inlet is the concrete box that's the drainage inlet is above the surrounding pavement. And so, you know, in the wintertime, it was just like a big pool of water around it. And, you know, in the short term, obviously, as a part of this project, it'd be great to just move that thing. Hugely expensive. And so I don't know, you know, we're talking about 3 expensive things: redoing the corner, redoing bulb outs, moving the drainage. I don't know that they'll all fit, but that would be the ideal. I don't know if there's some way short of that, and even in the interim, until this project is done, to grind down that lip. That said, I mean, you'd have to get a thinner grate if you're going to grind down the lip, because it sits on a step in the box. So, you know, I don't know what's feasible, but that lip, I mean, I avoid going over it because of that lip, and so I go around to the left, and there's like, I don't know, 12 inches around to the left of it. What else? Yeah.
Can I, while you're looking at your notes, I want to just comment on the pinch point on the northwest corner. It's also an uncomfortable area for pedestrians for the same reasons, for those boxes, and just the traffic is very close. The sidewalk isn't very wide, it's occluded, and it's hard to pass other people and launch off and wait there.
Yeah, and I think the fact that it's one of the main corners of where we're sitting now, it's not a great advertisement for Albany getting to City Hall. And it brings to mind what was in the Complete Streets plan, to think about that corner in light of also the bike lane or the biking facility on San Pablo, that would be just from Buchanan to Marin. So whatever's done there should have that in mind as well. And let's see. Somebody brought up to me that and this is more phase 3, but I think we can bring it up in this item since we're talking about these bulb outs, that there's places where the cycling lane runs along the curb in phase 3, but the curb isn't red, so people end up parking there. So
It was in the memo.
I'm sorry, what? Oh, it was in the
It
memo.
was addressed in the staff report.
Oh, okay, I'm sorry. And what did it say, since I didn't do diligence?
And to add,
Okay.
add red curbing.
Okay, great.
Take the words out of your mouth.
And then, did it cover the dashing, so grinding out to dash the stripes?
Look at Mark.
Yeah, okay.
We're getting a contract to do a number of striping things throughout the city, and that would be included in it, so.
Okay, so grinding out the
We'll grind-
stripe?
Well, we'll either black out or grind
Okay.
it, somehow get rid of
Okay.
make it dashed, and as well as the red curbs. And we'll also we're looking at changing out the grate there, and we'll look at trying to do something about the lip at that inlet.
Okay, great. And so I guess the stripe at westbound before Canes doesn't need to be dashed because people can't turn into Canes. So you only need dashes where motorists can actually turn. And then obviously where the stanchions are is what it is. I mean, that's a buffered lane, so that doesn't need to be dashed.
Turn there. They'll still turn there. Sorry, somebody turned there in front of me tonight.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think that's one of the reasons I'm really keen about getting the semi-diverter in there, because I almost got in head-on collision with a motorist that turned right there when I was coming here for a meeting.
So the Cornell one we were on top of, but the Canes we didn't. I'll pull that out of the scope.
Thanks.
Other comments?
I got one.
Yep.
For the drainage inlet, you probably already thought about this, but the long term would be to move the box and have a side inlet, so we don't have a grate at all. The other things, relative to the westbound lanes, as a cyclist, I don't mind the queues because I'm passing them mostly. I just have to watch for the cross traffic that's trying to go through the gaps. One of the things I do like that it has improved substantially is the evenness of distribution of cars in the 2 lanes approaching San Pablo is helped by the fact that the through lane feeding towards the intersection goes into the left lane of the 2 at the intersection. Because ultimately, most of the cars want to end up in the right lane to turn onto the freeway to head east or north. So there's a natural tendency for more cars to shift into the right lane. If we had fed them all into the right lane, we'd have the majority of the cars in the right lane, and the left lane would be much emptier. So feeding them into the left lane, for all that we have sort of this, they get blocked and can't always get to the right lane, it's still more efficient in that last block than it was before.
So they shift, and then the vehicles use the left lane first and then fill up the right lane afterwards?
Yeah, so sometime between San Pablo and the freeway, eventually more of them shift to the right-hand lane. Because by the time you get there, maybe, I'm going to pick a number, like 60% in the right lane, 40% in the left lane. But if at the intersection back here with San Pablo, we have a more 50-50, that's great. Right. Otherwise, what's going to happen, or what used to happen, was that all the cars would feed directly into the right-hand lane, and that was all the cars who wanted to be in that lane, plus all the cars that hadn't bothered to change into the left lane. So it felt like more like an 80-20 split, which made the signal crossing pretty inefficient in terms of the number of cars being put through, as Harry is pointing out to us. So I think even if we try to stretch the 2-lane section further back, which I'm not 100% convinced I would want to do, let's make sure we're feeding it into the left-hand lane so that the natural filtering out balances the lane utilization the best we can. For the eastbound direction, if we want to sort of clean up the bike lane in the right turn lane, the standard that was mentioned makes sense to me. The thing that I feel is probably most critical there is the right turn controls. We've had conversations before, and it may be that Caltrans still doesn't like this, to have a period. Right now, you've got the left turns coming off of westbound Marin, and then the light turns green for eastbound for both the bike path and for the cars. And the problem is that you've got the cars in the right turn lane looking for gaps in the left turning traffic, and they start turning 3 seconds before the light changes. So they're entering the crosswalk just when the bikes and pedestrians get a green, and if you're not paying attention, you pop out and there's the car right on you. So during at least the tail end of that left turn phase, I'd like to have a no right turn on red with a blank out sign or whatever technique we want to use so that we're still being efficient the rest of the time. But that's the critical moment when the conflicts occur. So if we could get the blank out sign approved by Caltrans and manage to build it into a project, that would be great. To the concern about traffic turning on Jackson, we could kind of pull something like that down there as well to have a no right on red, certainly during the morning commute period, because we don't want to have the cars going through in front of the school there. So those are the thoughts that I had.
How do you prevent the cars turning right through the gas station?
I'm less concerned about the ones going through the gas station.
Well, they're crossing the sidewalk twice.
They
and
are.
bike lane.
Yeah. But at least they're going relatively slow because going up and down the driveway slows them down a bit.
So I presume Phase 4 was going to include these signalization concepts, because that was one of the key features, but I know we haven't really talked about it. So
I'm sorry, I missed that.
I said that the signalization, like the no right turn on red, so is that still in the mix?
Well, I think that's what we would like to study and bring back to you.
Yeah, okay.
As long as Parisi's looking at that,
Yes,
great.
thank you.
So this is where I was going to add that there is this Rapid Corridors project through MTC, and it will look at upgrading the TSP at this intersection. I think looks like there's old TSP emitters, and I don't know if those are gone now. I'm not familiar enough.
Transit slip-through authority?
Yeah.
What is TSP?
Transit signal priority.
Thank you.
Yes. And so the way that TSP will work, it will need to take time from some other phase of the signal in order to give it to the buses to get through. But the technology is much better these days that it's not going to be as black or white as that. And it's GPS-based and looking at the bus and if it's on time or not, and then granting it that way. Or looking at, can it grant it given the amount of capacity or the amount of vehicles at the intersection? It can, say no. But that is going to be a project coming up.
So does the state of the technology, you mentioned looking where the bus is, how it's running, because it seems like if 3 phases ahead, it could either shave or extend phases, then it would be like not as noticeable to motorists. Is that what they're looking at? As
That would be exactly it.
Okay.
So you can look a number of phases ahead, shave off seconds here and there,
Yeah.
So it's not so impactful.
Yeah, great.
But there are going to be intersections, universities on Pablo, where you're not going to get any time.
Yeah.
So, but yes, that is the concept. Okay. Any other comments on this one? All right. Look forward to the evaluation. Item 5.5, proposed driveway red curb policy.
Thank you. Albany residents have requested and the city has installed red curb paint adjacent to driveways in the past without an official policy in place. Consideration was generally made to minimize the impact of on-street parking. Residents often request this to improve access in and out of their driveways when vehicles park on the street or making it difficult to do so. Staff is proposing a policy to handle at the staff level these requests and guidance on when there isn't an impact on parking. This would include if there's a curb length to the next driveway that's between 12 and 19 feet, that would not be permitted, interpreting that as a reduction, as a taking away of viable parking space. The other main component, as it's currently being proposed, is that there would be a reduction in the amount of red curb paint based on how wide the driveway is. So if you have a 7-foot driveway, you can get 2 feet of red curb paint on either side, making an 11-foot approach, essentially. If you have a wider driveway, we would propose making less red paint on either side as less of an access issue in and out. Those are the two main sort of judgment calls of the proposal. Interested in feedback on that, but essentially, if staff is concluding that there's not an impact on parking, we would be able to issue it and approve it. If they want to appeal that decision, it would come to the Traffic and Safety Commission. And the language I put in the policy in terms of the commission evaluation would be to consider whether the applicant has demonstrated a need for the curb space that outweighs preservation of such space for public use. So can talk in greater detail or answer any questions on that.
Okay. Questions from the commission? I had a question. How often or how frequent are we getting these types of requests?
I've gotten maybe a dozen in the last year. My response more recently has been need to set up a policy because I didn't have much guidance when we were doing it before or not, and felt like I needed that before I went out and made these judgment calls and handed extra work over to Mark. So yeah, I've been telling people I'm developing a policy that I'll get back to folks for the last several months.
Okay.
So would there be any flexibility with the 11 feet? Because I'm pretty sure, like, I live on a small, narrow lot. I have a 25-foot lot. And I don't think that I would meet the, I don't think I could get red paint. Not that I want red paint, but I just don't think that I could get red paint. And I think there's going to be a lot of folks who there's just not, they're not greater, they're not in a stretch that has less than, so the way I'm reading is if it's less than 12 feet, you can get red paint, or if it's greater than 19 feet, you can get red paint?
That's right. The real tricky part, and other cities have 12 feet is a little small, but there are Fiats and Scions and other cars that fit in that spot, but often that is the spot that's slightly substandard that people are trying to squeeze into, so that's often what's getting requested to get red paint, but could in theory have cars that could park there. So that's the tricky middle zone where you're potentially taking a space away. If it's less than 12 feet, the policy as it's written would say that's fine, reducing that further. If it's greater than 19 feet, then that's fine, reducing it by putting some red paint. But in that middle window where it's about the length of a car or you know, some cars could fit there, we don't want to reduce that further.
And could you have paint on one side of the driveway and not the other? Like, could you do that if?
Yeah, so if the curb,
asymmetrical, yeah.
So if the curb distance from the driveway to the next driveway, the other direction was not in that range, you could just do that side.
Okay.
You can also, often there are like the flare where it's going from the full curb down to the driveway. That part, in theory, you're not supposed to be parking, so we could paint just the flare, but not actually be extending the no parking stretch of the driveway, or the treatments that you could still do.
Yeah, because I think that you probably, I think this is a good idea, but I think you're going to run into the folks who have the narrow lots are going to, who live maybe off of a block off of Solano or San Pablo, or have a lot of like traffic. I mean, the only time somebody blocks my driveway is on Solano Stroll. That's so it's not like a problem, but I know we have friends who it is a problem. People blocking their driveway often, and I think that you're going to run into challenges implementing this with folks on the narrow lots.
So the standard size of a vehicle, do they all fit within that 12-foot range, like as an SUV somewhere around the bigger, right?
The bigger.
I was questioning the range. I don't know if you had any logic about coming out with the range.
So we could extend beyond the 19 feet for not wanting to reduce a 20-foot curb that a larger vehicle might have trouble fitting in if you took 2 more feet off of that. So that is currently, as it's written, 12 to 19 feet. I think there are some vehicles that, if it was 20 feet reduced down to 18 might, I guess I didn't look up the large end of the spectrum. I was focused on the smaller end, but I can see that, yeah, if you have a large truck or something, you may still be reducing it under the current range.
I was just thinking of looking at what the common occurrence would be, and it seems like SUVs are still popular vehicles, maybe less so than before, but I don't know. Just a thought.
Although I don't think the average SUV is that long, because part of the, I think they have I can't remember the name of them, extended SUVs. I think it's more, full-size pickup trucks.
Yeah.
Because SUVs are built on a light truck chassis.
Right, so
That's true.
SUVs don't typically go over 17 feet.
Okay.
And so that full-size pickup is not at least again, anecdotally, doesn't seem a particularly common vehicle type parking on Albany streets.
Yeah.
To Commissioner Paulson's point, so it doesn't seem like the policy, as it's written now, admits of this sort of asymmetric treatment. So maybe that could be mentioned. Sure. I think that's what you were suggesting, you could paint more red curb on one side than the other.
Is there a benefit to going 3 feet one direction away from the drive? Is that what you're saying? If you couldn't go one direction, that you would go more than 2 feet the other direction?
Well, I guess it wasn't clear to me the way it's written. If there's between 12 and 19 feet on one side,
right.
then you can't do anything on either side. The way it's,
I can
so
make
you
sure
can
that that's
massage
clear.
that. I'm just saying.
Each side should be treated independently.
Right.
Yes, yeah.
Right. Yeah. So not so much that you would do more on one side just to make it clear. The sides are treated separately.
Okay. Any other questions? We're already blended to comments. Comments?
I think it's really well done, very nuanced, and it's addressing the main issues there. And most importantly, it's request-driven. Someone who doesn't have a problem isn't going to ask for it.
Yeah, I think I appreciate staff bringing this forward along with the blue curb and just streamlining things. It's really awesome. Thank you.
I believe we need to make a motion on this item.
Go for it.
I will move approval with the amendment to make it clear that each side of the driveway is treated separately.
Second that.
All right. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Seeing none, item passes. Item 6, announcements.
We're on item 6, which is, I think, about Washington.
Oh, yes. So what I want to do is bring to you at the last council meeting, we brought we had to make a designation for our SB1 money, and this is somewhat of a formality. It's due May 1. So we brought it to council, and I just wanted to update you guys. We plan to spend our $315,000 or so on the Washington project.
Yay. So is that, how much is the price? Because this is from San Pablo to Key Route. It seemed, this is grind and overlay, or what's the?
It's a complete it's a grind and overlay. We're redoing curb ramps. There's drainage. It's a pretty extensive project. So $350,000 is not the whole project cost.
Okay, I was wondering, do you have any just ballpark?
Actually, I don't have a good sense on the project cost at this point, but it's pretty, I imagine it's over $1 million.
Yeah, okay. That was kind of what I was thinking. Okay.
Yay. Announcements? Other additional announcements? Are we on to?
Yeah, please.
Great. So May is Bike Month. And of course, Strolls and Rollers are working with Bike East Bay to sponsor an Energizer station on the morning of May 9th between 7 and 9 at Masonic and Marin, or the Greenway and Marin, which are right next to each other. We have giveaways, swag bags, and food and drink, and a great overpouring of cycling goodwill. It's great to just stop by and invite everyone and your friends and neighbors and your local school if they choose to come. We have several schools that come down as a bike bus and visit. That's a lot of fun. There are other things going on during Bike Month. Bike to School Day, I believe, is the day before for most schools on Wednesday the 8th. There's activities like the Bike In movie. There's a Bike About Town. Look at your activity guide. Look at the city calendar.
Do you know what the movie is?
I forget. It's something bike related, but it's not breaking away.
That's the only one I know.
Well, I don't think it's the Triplets of Belleville. I mean, there are only a few, right? I can get back to you on that.
I'll look it up on that.
I can look it up.
Any other announcements?
Yeah, along those lines, I'll mention that Wildcard Tasting Room is having an event on May 25th. That is a fundraiser, actually, for the bike rack that's just been installed there. And the city has permitted blocking off 2 parking spaces there so that people can park their bikes that day. So have much more parking capacity for biking. So I think it'll be an interesting experiment and kind of a pop-up bike corral.
With racks.
Pee-wee's Big Adventure is the movie.
Oh, okay.
Oh, boy. Appropriate. Any other announcements? Okay, item 7, future agenda items. Requests from the commissioners?
Well, again, review post-project monitoring of the Hawk signal in Monroe, which I know staff has mentioned. I think getting that in the works for improvement, at least a sign sooner rather than later. Street tree policy, that has been looked at by Parks and Rec, and I think this body should look at it as well, since it has a nexus with sidewalk damage and standards recommendations.
Any other agenda item requests?
Well, I'd love to get an update on the Keynes and Adams pilot project.
It's, well, if you would want it on the agenda, we don't have, you've made a recommendation to the city council. We're planning to bring it to the city council within the next couple of months. We don't have a specific date. In particular, we wanted to let the San Pablo corridor study roll out publicly so that we could talk about that and how that fits into what we're doing on Keynes and Adams. So now we're able to do that. When we go to council with your recommendation, they'll have the broader context. And it's just a matter of fitting it into workload with the council. And the most time-sensitive part of it is to probably time it such that it goes to council before the council next reviews the capital improvement program budget. Because we need the council to give us some direction on the Keynes Adams project, and then we can put it into the CIP at that point. And that's sometime summer time for the CIP, probably.
Yeah, we haven't set a date, but we're looking at summer, July, and if not, probably September.
Having it go to city council would satisfy my,
Excuse me?
having it go to council would satisfy me.
Oh, yes, it's definitely going to city
Asking
council.
for it to definitely come.
Okay, good.
If I could ask, so is council going to be considering the San Pablo, this conceptual level project? And if so, I mean, this body didn't make any motions in that regard. So I guess it's the thoughts that were expressed to you will be transmitted in some form?
We're not planning to take the type of discussion that you had this evening to council. City Council did create for themselves a subcommittee of Mayor Nason and Councilmember Pilch, and they've met once or twice. I believe the city manager has either reached out to them or is about to reach out to them to check in again post-public meeting to see whether what that subcommittee wants to do next. So nothing planned for formal council action at this time.
So it seems like communicating this body's thoughts to the subcommittee in some fashion would be helpful.
Absolutely. If and when they meet, we'll make sure that we capture your comments today to them.
Thanks.
And the mayor's on, I think, there's like a policy advisory committee, right, or executive steering committee under ACTC, I believe. And she's attended and was presented the same information.
That's correct. She's the city's representative on ACTC, and there's a group, the policy
Subcommittee,
maker subcommittee of the 4 cities that have, in Alameda County at least, that are participating in and affected by the corridor project.
I know there was a lot of back and forth emails on Solano Avenue Complete Streets. So my understanding is that it will go to City Council, the concept as is that correct, or the plan as is? Significant additional analysis or alternative work?
So you've made a recommendation to the City Council. What we're planning to do for May 20th, that's a tentative date, but that's what we're working on right now, is to present to the City Council the draft report that everybody has seen with all the recommendations that come from the various advisory committees. Because you made a recommendation that introduced a new concept that we hadn't had the consultant look at. We have asked the consultant to prepare kind of a high-level memorandum, and we'll be hopefully getting that out in the next week or so. And to the general public, and we welcome comments from the commission or anyone else. And that's just to help inform the City Council, understand the proposal that you've made in the context of the draft report. And then the question for the City Council would be, how do they want to proceed? And do they want to bring it back to the commission to more fully develop your recommendation, or do something else? We're at the point where we need direction and funding authorization to wrap it up. So that's tentatively planned for May 20th, and if that were to change, I'll let you know. But and when we get the high-level memorandum from Tool, we'll put that out through the network of people who've, our community advisory group and the people who signed up for e-notifications for that project, as well as people who are, obviously you as commissioners.
Okay. Thanks. Anything else under future agenda items?
I just want to thank you for tracking that.
No problem. Not a problem at all. Okay, item 8 is next meeting. I believe that is Cornell's open house, Cornell Elementary's open house. So I think I will be late. According to last year's, I think I just was like half hour late or something. I don't know, Amy, if you have similar conflict for elementary school. I believe they do them all on the same night.
I'm not sure if, I don't have that in my, there is the 6th grade band is playing that night. But I'm not sure if there's if the Marin open house is that night
Okay.
as well, but I can talk to Justin. I don't
Does anyone know if the high school does an open house?
I don't know. Not there yet. Okay. And with that, we are adjourned. Thank you.
Right on time.
Right on time. Wow. No motion to Perfect.